core leadership principle is you push your decision-making down to the lowest level possible. We've got tons of data. We're getting better at building dashboards. We're getting better at all of this stuff. What is naturally happening when we do better with technology and frankly, we do better with data? Those decisions all get pushed up.
I think everybody knows what Snowflake is. What you do. Like the 30-second is you look like...
I don't think everyone in this space knows what Snowflake is.
Yeah, okay, fair. That's a
commercial,
fair point.
100%.
So flash a brief, right? Like we're not going to go all into like what is Snow, like there's the commercial, but like a brief, how should folks think about what sort of you being the global pub sector CTO at Snowflake means?
Yeah. Okay. Really brief analogy of what Snowflake is. If we think of next gen platforms in terms of like, fighter planes and every sort of platform we think of in DoD, Snowflake is your next gen data platform, right? Yeah, you like that? You like that? It just does everything, right? Wow. Like it's fully optimized. You don't have to worry about the bottom part of the stack. You focus on what you need to do. You train specifically for that piece. Yep. We have obviously all the plugins for AI ML. We do all that, but you got all the coding languages in it. It's like you're not just SQL, right? Yep. You've got containers, so you can choose your GPUs, right? You've got tons of security, and it's fully optimized in terms of speed, right, and scale. And the one caveat I'd put is specifically for Snowflake is cloud only, right? Because the only way you achieve that, frankly, is you have to be in the cloud. Yep. So there's a nuance with DoD in that sense, right? Because we can't fulfill 100% of everything.
Yeah, which I think, and there's that jumping off point where it gets really, really interesting because we in that sort of broader technology industry have seen sort of the power of the cloud, the power of being able to leverage the cloud, leverage access, leverage some of those capabilities that maybe otherwise we have historically not been able to, whether it's on-prem, it's on a server, whatever. Mm-hmm. As you look at what you guys are doing commercially and what you've seen commercially, take that sort of all that experience, take the Snowflake out of it, and talk about disconnected, air-gapped, fragmented, right? Like, how should companies or founders or teams, whatever, who are thinking about building for or bringing applications into defense, intel, national security, even think about access, lack thereof, integration with data in different environments? Yeah.
So I can't at all say that I've got, my mind wrapped around this problem. It is an incredibly hard problem. And, I'd be surprised if we figure it out in the next decade, to be honest, right? But what I can say is like, there are certain key first principles that we've seen in the commercial side and that we know need to be accounted for when we're thinking about very much our distributed sort of way that the architecture is going to look like for DoD. The first is that you have to have that network effect, right? And granted, we don't have the constraints that DoD has in terms of like all the edge computing, but it's not that it doesn't exist, right? Manufacturing has edge computing. There are plenty of use cases, medical, healthcare, right? Where that occurs. We just don't have it at like, quite at the mission level that DoD has. But the value of the network effects of connecting data is just incredible, right? And I think of data in terms of like vertical and horizontal. We've been all about big data, more data, better models, right? But when you think of like any AI, they talk about parameters, right? The more parameters they have, you're not talking about horizontal. Yeah. So that interconnection, that network effect is giving you the horizontal. And so we need that. Right? Yeah. There's no way around it.
How are you seeing, or I guess maybe have you seen any interesting approaches where folks are thinking about trying to balance, a network effect with maybe access to a cornered resource? Hey, it's a disconnected data set for a specific use case. And then how do you bridge the gap between the two? Because in this scenario, normally you're talking about sort of that cornered resource earlier in a journey, and then it starts to build into a network effect. I think, to your point, you've got the broad sort of enterprise network effect clearly demonstrated, but then all of these pockets become individual cornered resources, which to like readers of the 9/11 Commission just sounds like a bunch of vertical fiefdoms. And that's I think we've seen that in how cloud adoption is happening across government, a whole bunch of vertical. Where are you seeing interesting approaches, even if it's just to your point, sort of like incremental step up sort of functionality in that sort of push to horizontal?
I would definitely say we're seeing a ton of discussion and movement toward hybrid cloud, right? Where you have to have that on-prem or that edge compute, and it has to have some form of,
either the false choice of either or.
Yeah. And I almost think of it in terms of like an asynchronous, like web app or something like that, where just at a much bigger scale. Yeah. But I do think that there's in my mind, at least two aspects of why those edge cases exist. One is it's a technology issue, right? And then the second is it's an actual business issue, right? Like we are purposely siloed. Yeah. We all know where that's going. But what I would say is that with what we're seeing with security, and Snowflake does this, but it's not just Snowflake. Like there's a ton of other incredible tech companies working on security. So like one of the things we look at is data residency. The expectation across the board is that data residency is going to occur, state by state level, right? But it's going to be more than that. I've heard speculation that each individual state in the US might potentially get to data residency. And if you look at the value of data, once people recognize that value, it kind of makes sense that they're eventually going to legislate to the point of they don't want that value to leave because it's an owned asset, right? But we're hearing in the medical, right? Like hospital by hospital talking about data residency, not leaving. So you need to be able to combine it. We know the network effect, again, first principles, right? You need that. So then the question is, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Right. And you can't do it without having a network. You can't do it without secure sharing. And then for me, it's sharing is something that we think about in a Boolean manner.
Okay.
It's either yes or no, on or off, right? Yep. I don't think that's the case, right? We really have to think of it in a full gradient, right? And a dynamic gradient. And that really then addresses the whole business question. Yep. Right. And even to some.
Does that run you into like a policy barrier though? Because now I think you're in a spot that maybe doesn't fit in like an industrial age policy on access and all of that. So I agree philosophically. I agree with what you're saying on the gradient though.
You're running a tech firm, right? Can we be honest and say that technology right now is not the issue?
Yes.
The biggest holdup is not technology, it's policy, governance, discipline, hygiene. Like you name 100 things, it's processes, it's people, it's policy. And this,
I think there's a lot of debt. We use the term tech debt all the time. And I think everyone knows what tech debt is, but I think across all of those different organizational dynamics with people, process, policy, strategy, whatever it is, I think there's debt from historical transformation efforts or change efforts that have like started, stopped, and maybe it's because of the cyclical nature of appointees or elections or whatever. But I think you've got a little bit of fatigue, and then you've got a massive desynchronization issue when you look across even just USG, not even Global PubSec, where everybody's sort of like done a transformation at a different time, a different start point, a different end point, and like ultimately ended up at a different config than everybody else. And now we've got nobody owns that. How do we actually integrate and set precedent? And I can't for the life of me figure out like, is that an OSTP thing? Is that like
I think it's more fundamental. Yeah. So let's bring it back to leadership principles.
Yep.
We talk about, core leadership principle is you push your decision-making down to the lowest level possible. Now, we've got tons of data. We're getting better at building dashboards. We're getting better at, all of this stuff. What is naturally happening when we do better with technology and frankly, we do better with data? Yeah. Those decisions all get pushed up.
Yeah.
Right? That is not just the day-to-day operational decisions, that's policy, right? So if you're talking about take DoD in terms of the structures, and we've Rand put out a piece 20 years ago on the issues with flag officers and the Corps itself, and all these structural issues that we see just in terms of leadership. fundamentally is the same principle we're seeing in policy and technology. All those decisions, it all trickles from the same core root cause, right?
So you're almost talking about like a third wave knowledge age technologically.
Is that a Toffler thing?
It's a Toffler thing.
It's a Toffler
It's a great
thing?
framework. Why? I don't got to change it because it works. And but a second wave industrial approach to governance.
Yeah. The question is, and I don't want to sound like a revolutionist, right? And,
This is a safe space.
This isn't like
Nobody watching is going to
V,
judge you.
right? But how do you adjust a system that needs to adjust faster than the ability that the system can change, right?
Oh.
Because this is ultimately system.
Well, and how do you
thinking.
do that? It is, but there's the counterbalance there is because it's a yes and. How do you do that with no, like there's an acceptable degradation criteria to like current mission effectiveness that you've got to account for.
And unintended second, third order effects.
Yeah.
Right? Like, economics for me, which is sort of like, I always look at like those other unintended effects or
all the best people majored in it.
Exactly. So yeah, like for me, that's, I think the way I tend to look at it is there has to be a stable framework,
Yeah.
but the stable framework has to be highly adaptable.
Yep. I'll buy that.